Certainly controls everything, or is the route to controlling everything, which is one reason that in the backstory of the book there was a major collapse in 2024. Though I have one older character comment that he believes there's only so terrible it can be to go without the internet for 3 weeks. Nevertheless, it did result in planes crashing and trains crashing and lots of accidents on the highways because the traffic lights and all the other traffic controls don't function anymore. And as a consequence of this, everyone has to pay for essential infrastructure like electricity and gas and everything by post with a check. And so we've actually gone backwards. And that's, you know, that's by way of my observing that we have rather lazily and unthinkingly slid into a situation where we're utterly dependent, in the most primitive sense, on the internet functioning. And I find that forbidding. And that makes a good segue into the financial situation, because we're also utterly dependent on some very complex financial shenanigans to work properly, and they become ever more complex and even worse, ever more interdependent. And so I'm mistrustful of these mechanisms, and I think we should all be post-2008, and that was certainly one of the main inspirations for this novel. I think that a lot of people are under the misapprehension that we went through this terrible trial by fire and came out the other side, and now we're fine. My view is more that we came very close to total international fiscal collapse and the systems on which we depend for money to function. And they're building up again, the most pronounced of which is debt. And that's sovereign debt, government debt, as well as private debt. I'm raising the question, since it does seem to only go up. Is that real money? Is that money ever going to be paid back? So, I mean, what triggers the financial collapse of the United States in my novel? The dollar plummets. It's immediately replaced by a new international currency called the Bancor, which is an invention of John Maynard Keynes. Credit where due. And in retaliation, the American president renounces the national debt. And I'm not giving away the plot too much because that's very near the beginning, because that's what kicks everything off. And the trouble with renouncing the national debt, which I think sounds very cheerful, it's like, okay, well, we're just not going to pay it back. The inflation rate starts going up. So I'm looking at all of this. It sounds all very abstract and newspapery, but I'm looking at all of this through the experience of a single family. 4 generations of that family, and the family members are in very different financial circumstances at the beginning. Given the destruction of wealth that escalates little by little, people who were in quite disparate relations to each other financially are gradually all in the same boat. In fact, all in the same house. Of course. But I mean, in fact, there's a passage much quoted by this point in the book, which explains that novels set in the future are always about what we fear in the present. They're not about the future at all. And that's your author's mea culpa. It's like, look, reader, we know that this is about now. It's not really about the future. Although it is, you know, now keeps moving. Yeah. And the time keeps closing. So, you know, 2029 is very nearby. And in fact, one of the sacrifices of setting it in that year was knowing that in short order the real year is going to overtake the beginning of my novel. And that's a kind of planned obsolescence. I could live with that, partly because not very many novels survive beyond their publication anyway. So, if I'm going to be cynical. But beyond that, I mean, we have examples like 1984 and 2001: A Space Odyssey, and we're still reading them. In fact, 1984 hit the bestseller list in the New York Times only about a month ago. Now that's weird. So the key being that the dystopian novel and the near future novel is not obliged to be predictive. It simply has to hold together in its own terms. It has to be a good story. It has to have a point that resonates beyond an immediate point in time. And that's true of any book, really. Most novels are set at a particular point in time, especially in the realistic tradition. But we continue to read them because they are speaking to issues larger than that moment. I have to say that I never aim to write something that's never been written, aside from in the most particular sense. Because that's just a losing proposition. The competition is fantastic. And even in the economic dystopia area, Margaret Atwood has played around with some of the same ideas. Not exactly the same, but still one of the things that's going wrong in The Heart Goes Last is money. So I have a little company.
Yeah.
I like mine better. I don't think that's her best book.
Yes, having fun.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've never thought that literature should be grueling. And if it's edifying, then it should be along the way as a side thing. Primarily, people read fiction to be entertained, to be engaged. They read it for story. They want to know what happens next. They want to care about the characters, even if they hate them. And if they also learn something, then that's a little plus, and that's nice. And there is some economics in this book. I tried to make it as accessible as possible, in the spirit of, look what I found out, this is so weird. So it's just a form of sharing. And but I don't want it to be hard to read or a burden. And, I never try to write novels that are difficult to understand, difficult to read. I'm not criticizing anybody who chooses to do that and present a challenge to the reader. It's a different approach, but it's not my approach. It's just not what I like reading, especially as I get older and lazier. Reading, you know, in that half hour before you go to bed, it's like, please don't give me a problem. Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm aware of some of the traditions within the dystopian novel, one of which is the road novel. The premier example of which is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And in fact, there's one point in the book between the two sections. There's one that starts in 2029 and another that starts in 2047. But there is a journey that my characters take, and I do not choose to drag you through it. And it's partly an acknowledgement that this dystopian road novel thing is an established genre in itself, and let's just not repeat that. And the other reason I do that is that there is another journey that my characters would take, and let's not do it twice. Let's save it for when we really need it. So. That's well put. Yeah. You should write reviews.
Thank you.
I have written about money before.
Yeah.
In different contexts. And you mentioned so much for that, which is about the American healthcare system. So I was interested in that context, is that you literally have to buy your life in the American healthcare system, especially pre-Obamacare, which is when that book was set. You have to buy one of the things you're told you can't buy, right? And previously in A Perfectly Good Family, I wrote about an inheritance dispute between grown siblings. Not so much over cash, but over a house. It's still ultimately a financial dispute. And but I like the concreteness of the house and the emotional quality of the house. But in general, I find money a very emotional subject and quite rich. And I find that too many of my contemporaries don't take it seriously enough in their text. I have a feeling they take it seriously in their lives. But I really don't like coming across school teachers in fiction who live in adorable cottages in expensive areas. I mean, please. You know, I take my characters' finances seriously because, after all, our financial circumstances control a lot of our decisions. And I think that's an important element to know about a character. Of course it's a metaphor. That's one of the things that's interesting about it, because it's not worth anything itself, ironically. Yeah. It's worth nothing. It has to be converted into something else. Even when it is just sitting there and making people important, it converts into power. But it's an interesting quantity because we project upon it whatever we want. And what I find especially fascinating is that what most people truly want, the healthcare example aside, they can't buy. Right? I want this book to succeed commercially. Can I actually buy that? Now, my publishers could help, but there's no guarantee. I personally would like not to get old. Right? Sorry. And you know, most of us, we want love, we want respect, we want friendship, we want a sense of joy. All the stuff is just not on offer, it's not on the shelf. And therefore, we're constantly projecting upon this quantity something that it cannot acquire for us. And that wrong-headedness is really interesting. There's one of my favorite exchanges in this novel is in the second section between Willing, the protagonist, who's around 32 at this point, and his great aunt, who's stand-in for decrepit me. And she talks about the fact that the only reason she ever wanted money in her latter life was for safety, for security. And her grandnephew makes it very clear that you can't even buy safety. And they've just been through this huge economic tumult, which makes it very clear that even money isn't safe. So that's not on offer. And then he goes through all the other things that she might want that she can't buy. So that at the end of the day, money is almost useless to her. In fact, one of the only things that's left that money can buy is generosity. Well, I mean, you do a much better job of explaining what my book is about than I do, so... Yeah, I like the wordplay. Well, that's just true. I mean, to understand something, it has to be in context. I mean, I named the Stone Age just because of that expression we've got, being bombed back into the Stone Age. And I thought that for people who grew up with the internet and never had it off, except for, you know, maybe an hour or two, the idea of having no internet would be like going back to caveman days. Though there is a suggestion that there was a liberation also. One of my characters actually went back to reading books. Well, Nevada has a very interesting history.
Yeah.
It's always been a maverick state. It's full of mavericks and misfits, gamblers, prostitutes, and I have a little bit of history with Nevada as well because my in-laws live in Nevada. My father-in-law died before this book came out, and it's to my father-in-law that the book is dedicated.
Yeah.
But really anti-authoritarian and anti-government, and that's the kind of person who goes to Nevada. Yeah. I just didn't even hesitate in choosing the state that secedes from the Union. That would be the one. California might do so for a different reason, partly because it has the economic power to do so. It was fun. There is as you noted, a utopia at the end. I think that the form of the dystopian novel almost always has to flip into a utopian novel, in the same way that utopian novels flip into dystopian novels. Right? Things don't run perfectly for long. And even at the very, very, very end, on the last page, there's a little indication that even Nevada is not going to be perfect forever. I think one of the things that's nice about the form of the dystopian novel is that it usually ends on an upbeat note. There's a sense of promise and hope. Have made me prescient. No, I'm afraid I was like everybody else. I blithely thought Clinton would win, and I imagined that she would even win by a greater margin than was predicted. So, like everyone else, I went into shock. I think that's one of the things that has been eerie about this experience of Donald Trump becoming president. I still feel weird even saying that.
Yeah.
Is that it does seem to be blurring the distinction between fiction and reality. I've written before, you know, you couldn't make this man up. He behaves like a clumsy fictional character, not even a good one. One of my frustrations with Trump is that I don't find him very interesting. Maybe I find his election interesting, but he's not an interesting character. He's too much on the surface. I mean, I think we all know who he is. It's not a big mystery. He's a narcissist. All he cares about is what people think of him and whether he's winning. He has no real convictions. He doesn't care what happens, except to him. And that's one of the things that makes him so dangerous and unpredictable. Because when someone has an ideology, at least you can chart a logical course, what they will want to do. He's complete loose cannon because he is not moored by beliefs of any kind. I guess there's some connections. I mean, the president in my novel is not incompetent. His biggest problem is having inherited an enormous debt that he did not create, and it is not his fault. And whereas, well, Trump is incompetent and could get us into terrible trouble just by accident because he doesn't know what he's doing. In general, I'm far more worried about incompetence and stupidity than I am about deliberate malice and conspiracy. So I could see that some of his incoherent economic policies would add to the national debt, or just for the financial markets to realize this guy is dangerous, anything could happen. So yeah, I mean, some of this stuff could easily come to pass much sooner than 2029. And on the other hand, maybe we'll muddle through. I mean, I hope so. I would say that's reality right now. That's what we're all trying to get our heads around. I think that a lot of people are stuck in a state of incredulity, and it doesn't matter, because reality keeps poking along without you. It doesn't need your belief in it. You can't disbelieve it into non-existence. And there is this weird sense that because this shouldn't be happening, that if you withhold your belief that it is happening, then you can make it go away. and it doesn't work. Yes.
That's also ironic.
Yes, that's my young protagonist.
Yeah.
Who's observing that it's time for his aunt to give up her cartons of copies of her own novels to burn for fuel and boil water for pasta, because they're more valuable than as something to read. And he's saying that this isn't a time for novels, that we're in a novel. You know, that we might want to read later, but for now, whatever is happening is far more interesting than anything we could make up. Again, I come back to the current moment. There's that sense, right?
Yeah, of course.
That the newspaper exceeds anything that you could put between the covers of a novel. I like the little ironic reference to the fact that we're in a novel, and of course he's in a novel, and that's meant to be. I don't know whether it was important, it was fun.
Yeah.
I just thought that would be a nice decorative touch to the prose. So I was making the observation that our colloquial argot continues to transform.
Yeah.
And I thought that it had been just long enough that a few more expressions might have come on the scene. And so I came up with it. They're not that many. I was not trying to do a Clockwork Orange kind of thing, which has a glossary in the back where you can look up all these different words that he uses. It's Anthony Burgess, most of which are either Russian or Russian knockoff words. And there's a challenge to reading that text. Once you get the hang of it, it's kind of fun, but it does take an effort. And I don't require that kind of effort. I figure it's not very far from now. I try to use them just often enough that you can infer from the context what they mean, but not so often that it becomes repetitive or tedious. Inventing these little bits of slang was a whole lot of fun, but I was surprised at how hard it was. And that it just turns out that practically anything that sounds like English that you can pronounce, somebody has invented already. So every time I'd come up with a word that sounded cool and I'd never heard before. I put it into urbandictionary.com, and somebody else had come up with it already, and it had 5 different definitions. It was so discouraging. So, I mean, that was interesting in itself, how much people have already made up. That isn't, they're not in, these words are not in standard dictionaries, they haven't made a Oxford or anything, but they're out there. So I came up with, you know, like a jerk is a boomer poop, with obvious derivation. And I came up with a second set of expressions for the 2047, because obviously we've had another generation to invent stuff. And a lot of that terminology is more pointed. If you're talking bullshit, you're talking treasury. And of course that's a reference to the betrayal of the U.S. Treasury. Just you know, it was fun. Little touches. You are correct.
And would you say...
Did you figure that out by yourself, or did you trip across it?
No,
elsewhere?
I figured
You figured it out.
Yeah.
You know, you're one of the only people I have spoken to who picked it up. That's right. It's amazing how few people have noticed. Which is fine. You know, it was a little in-joke. You either get it or you don't, and if you don't, no big deal. They are working titles. Shouldn't have found them anywhere. But they are the working titles for those books. But if I had an appalling working title, I used it for this character's books. Again, it's a kind of in joke with my readership. And if you apply yourself, you can figure out which applies to which. So we need to talk about Kevin. It used to be called Cradle to Grave, which is awful. It's just awful. And I never exactly intended to call it Cradle to Grave, but I did have to live with that title for a while, knowing that it had to go. And I have occasionally had in one instance, had the experience of giving a crummy title to a book. And I don't know. Once you've published it, you never live it down. It's terrible. So there was a funny liberation in finally letting these awful titles out of the house. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, and I meant her to be a pain in the ass. And initially, I would have intended you to find her annoying, and I had every expectation of making her continue to be annoying. But I developed a certain affection for her. It's funny, I have an image of her which is outside of myself. I think that's just what happens with characters, so that she was intended to be a somewhat distorted version of myself, but little by little she seemed to evolve into an independent entity.